In a rather wild turn of events, which is sure to have massive repercussions leading up to the 2024 presidential race, a federal court has just ruled that President Trump is not immune from civil lawsuits which arise over what took place on January the 6th. Meaning that besides all the lawsuits that President Trump is already facing, because of this ruling, the door has now been flung wide open for civil lawsuits to be filed against him by, well, anyone who can make the argument that they were victimized on January 6th. And so, in the coming year, you can look out for members of Congress, Capitol Police officers, and maybe even attendees of the rally to file lawsuits against President Trump. Now, in terms of how we actually got to this point, let me back up and give you the backstory. Shortly after January 6th, you had members of Congress, Capitol Police officers, as well as members of the D.C. Police Department all file lawsuits against both President Trump as well as his general allies, making the argument that they bore responsibility for the violence and therefore they should pay monetary damages. On the flip side, President Trump and his legal team were making the argument that he was covered under the presidential immunity doctrine. That doctrine states that a president is free to carry out his duties without the threat of civil damage liabilities. Just for your reference, according to a Supreme Court decision from the year 1982, quote, "The immunity protects presidents from civil lawsuits over official acts or acts taken with the outer perimeter of his official responsibilities." Now, eventually, in February of last year, meaning February of 2022, a U.S. district judge issued a monumental ruling against President Trump. In that ruling, Judge Amit Mehta, who was a judge appointed to the bench by Barack Obama, he wrote in his 112-page order that Trump's speech on that day, on January the 6th, was a rare instance when a president's words were not immune from lawsuit. Here's specifically what this judge wrote, quote, "To deny a president immunity from civil damages is no small step. The court well understands the gravity of its decision, but the alleged facts of this case are without precedent, and the court believes that its decision is consistent with the purposes behind such immunity." Now, as you would have likely imagined, President Trump's legal team quickly appealed that decision, and the appeal was heard by a panel of 3 judges. You had Judge Sri Srinivasan, appointed to the bench by Barack Obama. You had Judge Judith Rogers, appointed by Bill Clinton. And then you had Judge Gregory Katsas, appointed to the bench by President Trump himself. And on December 7th of 2022, of last year, so basically 1 full year ago, President Trump's legal team made the appeal argument in front of those judges by saying that President Trump's speech was indeed covered under presidential immunity, and therefore there was no basis for civil lawsuits to be brought forth against him. Here's part of what President Trump's lawyers wrote in their appeal, again, a full year ago. Quote, "In the run-up to January 6th and on the day itself, President Trump was acting well within the scope of ordinary presidential action when he engaged in open discussion and debate about the integrity of the 2020 election." And so essentially, the legal argument here on the Trump side is that the president, what he was doing on January the 6th, fell within the scope of presidential duties. On the flip side, however, lawyers for the plaintiffs, they argued that, quote, "President Trump was acting far beyond the outer perimeter of his office when he conspired to use violence and intimidation to prevent members of Congress from carrying out their constitutional duty to count the electoral votes and certify the results of the 2020 presidential election." Now again, this appeal was argued before the court on December 7th of last year. And while a typical appeals process might take 3 or maybe 4 months, well, as I mentioned earlier, this case has been stalled for about a year already, leading Congressman Eric Swalwell, who happened to be one of the plaintiffs suing President Trump, to say this, quote, "I am surprised how long it's taking. The delay does seem unusual, but I'm hopeful we'll get a decision." And indeed, just earlier today, he got his decision. That's because after almost a full year of deliberations, just earlier today, the appeals court came out with their official ruling against President Trump. Specifically, their ruling was largely based on their determination that President Trump's campaign, meaning his presidential campaign for another term in office, was not an official presidential act, and therefore it did not fall under the general umbrella of presidential immunity. Here is part of what their ruling said, quote, "In arguing that he is entitled to official act immunity in the cases before us, President Trump does not dispute that he engaged in his alleged actions up to and on January 6th in his capacity as a candidate. But he thinks that does not matter. Rather, in his view, a president's speech on matters of public concern is invariably an official function, and he was engaged in that function when he spoke at the January 6th rally and in the lead up to that day. We cannot accept that rationale." The judges then continued down this line of reasoning to explain that, in their opinion, in that moment, President Trump was acting as essentially a private citizen running for office, rather than the President of the United States. Quote, "While presidents are often exercising official responsibilities when they speak on matters of public concern, that is not always the case. When a sitting president running for re-election speaks in a campaign ad or in accepting his political party's nomination at the party convention, he typically speaks on matters of public concern. Yet, he does so in an unofficial, private capacity as office seeker, not in an official capacity as office holder. And actions taken in an unofficial capacity cannot qualify for official act immunity. Meaning, in plain English, that the appeals court ruled against President Trump. Although, oddly, even after a full year of deliberations, the court wrote in this decision of theirs that this was not the final word on the question of Trump's presidential immunity, and here's specifically what they wrote. Quote, President Trump has not had a chance to counter those allegations with facts of his own. When these cases move forward in the district court, meaning the lower court, he must be afforded the opportunity to develop his own facts on the immunity question if he desires to show that he took the actions alleged in the complaint in his official capacity as president rather than in his unofficial capacity as a candidate. At the appropriate time, he can move for summary judgment on his claim of official act immunity. The decision is not necessarily even the final word on the issue of presidential immunity, so we of course express no view on the ultimate merits of the claims against President Trump. Meaning, in plain English, that this appeal ruling applies to civil lawsuits in general brought forth as a result of January the 6th. However, each individual lawsuit must still be argued in court to determine whether that lawsuit is covered or not covered by presidential immunity, meaning that civil lawsuits can be brought forth, but each one still must be judged independently. And so these cases from the member of Congress and the Capitol Police Force have now been remanded to the lower court for summary judgment on the question of presidential immunity. However, given the fact that the appeals court ruled as they did, well, it is highly, highly unlikely, to say the least, that the lower court will rule any different. At which point, President Trump's legal team will likely have to appeal this decision all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, at which point, well, frankly, anything can happen. Until then, though, well, get ready for a deluge of civil lawsuits being filed against President Trump in the lead up to the 2024 presidential race. If you'd like to read this entire court ruling for yourself, I'll throw a PDF version of it. It'll be linked down in the description box below this video for you to peruse if you happen to be the type of person who likes to dig into the weeds. And all I ask in return is that as you're making your way down there to the description box, take a super short detour to smash those like and subscribe buttons. Smashing that like button will quite literally force the YouTube algorithm to share this video out to ever more people, while that subscribe button will make sure that every time we put out a new piece of content here on YouTube, it'll hit your newsfeed, and so you won't miss anything that we publish. Again, that subscribe and like buttons are right there below the video. All right, I'd like to take a super quick moment and introduce the sponsor of today's episode, Gundry MD, which is an awesome company founded by Dr. Stephen Gundry, a cardiologist, a heart surgeon, as well as the director for the Center of Restorative Medicine. And Dr. Gundry's big thing is to educate the public about a certain condition called leaky gut, which according to his research is largely caused by a toxin that comes into people's bodies when they eat all of this quote-unquote healthy food, the exact types of food that they have been taught to eat by the fraudulent food pyramid. And by the way, just as an aside, outside of this ad, the food pyramid that's been pushed onto this country by the federal government for the last 5 or 6 decades is indeed quite fraudulent, but that's a bigger topic for another day. Now, leaky gut syndrome is something that millions of Americans experience every single year. And some warning signs of it include things like weight gain, fatigue, problems with your digestive tract, stiff and achy joints, and even certain types of skin problems. And while a lot of those just sound like the normal signs of aging, according to Dr. Gundry, it's easy to conflate the signs of a leaky gut with just the normal signs of aging, because leaky gut takes a long time, sometimes several years, to actually develop. And so people times often conflate the two. However, according to Dr. Gundry's research, you can actually fix the problem at its root if you know which exact toxins in which exact foods are causing it. And so if you'd like to learn more about this leaky gut condition, as well as Dr. Gundry's research into what's really causing it, you can simply head on over to gutcleanseprotocol.com/Roman. That's gutcleanseprotocol.com/Roman, and watch the video that Dr. Gundry put together. It's a free video that Dr. Gundry put together where he goes point by point through all of his research. The link to it will also be down in the description box below. Dr. Gundry, thank you so much for sponsoring this episode. And now let's head on back to the studio. And then lastly, if you're watching this episode and you're thinking to yourself, man, I love this show, I just wish Roman would put out more episodes every single week. Well, you're in luck, because I do. Over on Epoch TV, our awesome no censorship video platform, I put out somewhere between 1 to 3 exclusive episodes of Facts Matter every single week, usually on topics that are quite frankly not welcome here on YouTube due to the regime of censorship. And so if you'd like some extra episodes of Facts Matter, including a huge backlog from the last 3 years, well, you can find it all over on the website. And the best part is that right now, the Epoch Times is running an awesome sale on subscriptions. Just 25 cents a week for the whole year, which if you do the math, works itself out to just be $1 a month. And so if you've been on the fence, you know you're looking for an honest source of news, but you're not sure whether you're ready to subscribe, well, take the sale as an opportunity to try it for yourself for just $1 a month. The link will be right there at the top of the description box below. You can click on that link and it'll take you to the sale page where you can try the Epoch Times. You can, of course, cancel anytime if you're not satisfied, but something tells me that you'll love it and be a subscriber for a long, long, long time to come. And so again, that link is right there at the top of the description box below. I hope you click on it, and I hope that you join us over at the Epoch Times website. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed, most importantly, stay free.